My name's Allegra Stratton. I work for ITV News. I'm their national editor. I also work on the Sunday on Peston Sunday. But more importantly than that, we have Anand Menon, who you will know. He is and has been the very public face, or one of the very public faces, trying to explain Brexit for the last 15, 18 months to the public. Anand, why don't you kick off?
Thanks, Allegra. I've got a public face and a disappearing voice, so if it goes, I'm very sorry. I just want to make 3 points about the state of the negotiations. The first is, I think they're better. The state of the negotiations is better than many think, but slightly worse than the government claims. Better than many think, simply because I think there's been a lot of nonsense spoken ever since that photo of David Davis with no papers on the table appeared. It's become fashionable to say the British government doesn't know what it's doing, doesn't know what it's want, isn't negotiating very well. Actually, behind the scenes and away from the sort of febrile politics here, which I'll come back to, a lot of technical issues that some people thought would prove, if not intractable and incredibly difficult, have actually been settled. So a lot of technical progress in these talks has been made. It's simply not the case that, things have stalled. On the other hand, worse than the government claims, because I think the number of very, very difficult issues that remain about rights to permanent residence, about cut-off dates, about rights of return, about that curious distinction between family reunion and family formation. Family formation is an unfortunate term that leads to all sorts of dodgy images in my mind, at least. But anyway, these distinctions are now what are troubling negotiators. So I think there are some very, very serious issues left. And of course, front and centre amongst them is this notion of the European Court of Justice. And as so many EU negotiations, we're now down to linguistics. Whether we should be taking account of or paying due regard to seems to be the issue du jour. We're not quite sure. The British government, it seems to me, doesn't quite understand what it thinks about a direct effect of the European Court of Justice. So it's now quibbling about the language, saying pay due regard to rulings of the European Court of Justice. In its August paper on dispute resolution, it quoted the Lugano Convention, which talks about paying due regard, and said that isn't a direct influence. It seems to have changed its mind. But I think the British government here needs to figure out what the European Court of Justice is and what kind of role for it would be willing to accept. I see no reason why by the time we get to December we will not be told that we've made sufficient progress and things will not be able to move forward. But my warning message, this is as much a philosophy of life for me as a statement on Brexit, is that the worst is yet to come. And the worst is yet to come in at least two ways, I think. I think firstly because we underestimate the complexities involved in transition. Obviously, the easiest way to do transition would be to extend Article 50, but I think that is politically impossible. Not extending Article 50 raises all sorts of questions about how legally you essentially have the rights and obligations of membership without being a member state. So one example, would EU trade deals with third parties apply to the UK if it wasn't a member state? I think that's far from clear. And the second point about the future that concerns me is I think it will be incredibly difficult for us to sign and ratify an ambitious free trade deal. Difficult for at least two reasons. One, because we will have no leverage. The notion that we can trade off the Brexit bill against a trade deal makes no sense because we'll have agreed to the Brexit bill before we're really negotiating the trade deal. Secondly, ratifying any kind of trade deal in continental Europe at the moment that makes provision for a dispute resolution mechanism that isn't the ECJ would be every bit as problematic as ratifying one here where the dispute recognition resolution mechanism was the ECJ. So I don't have a great deal of confidence. Final point, have I got time for one final point?
You've got 2 minutes.
Perfect. And I know the focus on of today isn't domestic politics, but I thought it was worth saying something about domestic politics because it does seem to me that actually potentially the biggest constraint on these negotiations is not something from Brussels, but something here in the United Kingdom. There is that permanently unnamed cabinet minister who has come out with that phrase, if we cancel Brexit, we destroy the Conservative Party. If we go ahead with Brexit, we destroy the country. Which seems maybe a little OTT, but to summarise, if you want, no, I've been desperately trying, which seems to summarise to a certain extent the dilemma that the party faces, the governing party faces at the moment. And it is impossible to exaggerate the degree of volatility in our politics at the moment. The fragility of the cabinet and of the government, the fragility of the sort of Corbyn connivance, because Corbyn has masterfully said nothing about Brexit and insists on repeating this phrase, tariff-free access to the single market, that I swear will drive me to my grave if I hear it much more. There is a lack of clarity and there are profound divisions on both sides of the aisle, and that does not make for a stable or predictable negotiating position. And there's the unpredictability of Parliament because people are doing the same thing for different reasons. If you think about the debate over the withdrawal bill, there are some, like Dominic Grieve, who are genuinely worried about the bill for good, principled reasons of parliamentary sovereignty. There are others who are worried about it for political reasons. I spoke to a Tory backbencher last night who said, I'm going to vote for a series of the amendments. I said, why? He said, imagine Corbyn with those powers. You know, if the government falls in, I'm perfectly happy for Theresa May to have those powers, but if in 6 months' time the government falls, Corbyn can use the statutory instrument powers in that bill to wreak untold damage on our economy. So there are a lot of people doing things for different reasons, which makes prediction very, very difficult. The final thing I'll say, and I'll leave it as a sort of segue and a challenge to Lindsay, if you like, is that it strikes me that the civil service is in a bit of a mess at the moment. My default position is to defend the civil service. I think the civil service does its job admirably and has done its job admirably for many decades in political circumstances that were, to put it mildly, not ideal. That being said, the notion that we are somehow recreating Aegis in the Cabinet Office, having previously created DexU as a way of replacing them. So you have a sort of shadow ministerial setup within the Cabinet Office now, does lead me to wonder whether DexU has a future, what its role is, whether there's duplication, and whether actually disorganisation in Whitehall is going to be yet another factor that inhibits our ability to negotiate effectively down the line. I'll leave it there.